Well, certainly the government doesn't want the public to know that inflation is created by government, because then they might oppose it, obviously, because it's a tax. They want to blame inflation on the public, on greedy corporations, gouging their customers, on OPEC for raising the price of oil, speculators for trading in commodities, sometimes even maybe greedy unions demanding higher wages. The government wants to point the finger at everybody but itself. And, part of the problem is inflation sometimes, instead of causing prices to go up, it prevents them from falling. And so we don't actually see the harmful effects of inflation because you don't realize how much lower your cost of living would otherwise have been absent government-created inflation. Because the beauty of capitalism, what little we have left in this country, is that capitalism is a force that leads to abundance, that leads to efficiencies and economies of scale. And so normally in a capitalist economy, the cost of goods and services is going down. And that means our standard of living is going up because we can afford to buy more stuff. But when the government creates inflation, oftentimes it prevents those benevolent price declines from happening. But we don't complain about it because we don't realize the benefit that we never enjoyed. So, if prices go up by 2%, but they should have gone down by 5%, the government says, oh, we have 2% inflation, but we don't. We have 7% inflation. Prices are 7% higher because the government inflated the money supply than what they would have been had the government not created the inflation in the first place. Well, there's only one reason that anybody suffers from inflation, and that's because of the government. Government is created by inflation. It's a creature of government. In fact, it's simply a stealth way that the government taxes us. Because inflation, by definition, is the expansion of the money supply. I mean, to inflate literally means to expand. People normally think about prices, but you can't expand a price. It's the money supply that expands. But when you increase the supply of money, you diminish the value of that money. And now more money is required to buy goods and services. And so the price of those goods and services rises to reflect the additional money. So it's the increase in price is merely a result of the inflation that is created by government, specifically the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve is expanding the money supply, but the government is ultimately spending that money supply into circulation when it sends out checks without collecting tax revenue, right? You have these big budget deficits. Where does the government get a lot of the money to spend if it's not collecting it in taxes and it's getting it from the government that is simply creating it out of thin air? Well, the government needs money to spend, and it has two ways of getting that money. One is the honest way. It can take it from us through taxation, right, where the government literally takes money out of our paychecks so we have less money to spend. Or they can persuade us to loan them the money, which again, we take money that we could have spent and we loan it to the government, and the government spends it instead. Now, of course, that represents a claim on future taxpayers, which are ultimately going to have to pay taxes to the government so the government can pay me back the money it borrowed. But in either of those two ways, taxation or legitimate borrowing, money is sent from the private sector to the government, and then the government puts it back into the private sector. So there is no net increase in the money supply, but there is a net reduction in my personal money supply, because money that I send to the government cannot be spent by me. But I have less to spend, so I get less stuff. The other way the government can pay for spending is just by printing money, and then it gives that newly printed money to somebody else to spend it. But when that happens, even though the government didn't take my money, the government took my purchasing power. Because now the people who got that newly printed money, they go out into the marketplace and spend it. They compete with me to buy goods and services, and that drives up the price of those goods and services. And that additional price basically is the equivalent of a tax. So let's say the government takes 10% of my money in taxes, and now I have to reduce my spending by 10% because I only have 90% of my money. So I buy less stuff. But if the government leaves me with all my money, but just prints up the equivalent of 10% of my money and gives it to another person. And now that person goes and buys goods and services, and the price of those goods and services go up by 10%. I now have to reduce my spending by that same 10% because I don't have an unlimited amount of money. Things now cost more. So I end up in the same place, regardless of whether the government takes my money or my purchasing power. The difference is when the government takes my money, I know who to blame, right? That you raise my taxes. But when they steal my money through inflation, I'm confused, especially when the government is lying to the public about why prices are going up, or in fact, they're not, or they're pretending they're not going up by using the CPI, which doesn't even capture the real extent that prices are going up. So I don't even know they're going up if I believe the government. But what I do know is my standard of living is going down because, I'm not able to afford as much stuff with my income. But I'm not blaming government, and I'm not taking my frustration out at the polls. That's what the politicians don't want. Okay. They don't like to raise taxes because the voters don't like paying higher taxes. But if they steal their purchasing power through inflation, the voters don't know they're getting robbed, and they may still continue to reelect the people who are robbing them. Yeah, well, apparently he stopped using the word transitory. So I don't know what he's using now, but he still expects inflation to come down. I mean, if you look at the Fed's projection of interest rates 2 years from now, by the end of 2023, the Fed still expects rates to be below 2%. Now, how could that be? How could rates be that low if the Fed is actually committed to fighting inflation? Because even if you believe the government's methodology for tracking prices, prices are rising 7% right now. Well, how are you going to do anything about 7% inflation when your interest rates are lower than 2%? You've got negative real interest rates greater than 5%. You're not going to make any headway fighting inflation unless you have positive real interest rates, which means if inflation is 7%, you need interest rates of maybe 8%, 9%. I mean, ask Paul Volcker. I mean, he's not alive anymore, but, they didn't take rates up to 20%, for the fun of it. Right. Rates went up there because inflation was 13% and people thought it was going to get even worse. And so the Fed had to get in front of the inflation curve. Well, Powell is still way behind the inflation curve. That curve is accelerating now, and it's clearly going to accelerate more as the size of the deficits get bigger and bigger, and the Fed is then required to print even more money to monetize it. Now, it's not legally required to do it. In fact, it should refuse to do it. That's what the Fed is supposed to do. But unfortunately, the Fed does Congress's bidding, and whatever deficits Congress runs, the Fed is happy to monetize them. In fact, the Fed is encouraging the government to run bigger deficits specifically so it can monetize them.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
Do you want to know one thing about crypto? I made over 3,000% in profit in a few weeks. Fact is, the traditional financial system, the traditional money system makes you poor, not rich. If you want to earn $500,000, $1 million, you have to wait until you're 50, 60, 70 in the traditional financial system, and you probably will still be broke. And you will be old. This is not a sexy combination, as you can imagine. But the question is, how can you start in crypto and make these profits? Where to invest? Where to start? My name is Gunnar and I'm from Germany, as you can hear, and things are a little bit different in Germany. More about that later on. Fact is, there are lots of different cryptocurrencies. It's a gigantic universe where beginners and professionals get easily lost. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are 7 key steps you need to follow to become successful in this market. You have to know them, and if you fail one of them, it's literally impossible to succeed in this market. Just an example, one of the key points is your exchange, and one of the biggest are, for example, Binance and Coinbase. These are trusted and well-established exchanges, but, and this is a big but, you won't find the super profitable coins on those exchanges. The unknown super profitable coins that get gigantic profits are not traded on those kind of exchanges. They are traded on much smaller insider platforms that are barely known. And I can tell you what those super secret exchanges are and why they are so profitable. And another super important thing are the right information sources. The point is, the internet is gigantic. There are hundreds and hundreds of YouTube channels, blogs, pages, and much more. And there are also market makers and influencers. For example, Elon Musk, he is not a crypto guy, but the moment he recommended Dogecoin, it went through the roof, to the moon, so to say. But why did he recommend it? Where did he hear it from? He didn't hear it from newspapers. And believe me, he is listening to someone. But you have to know who, and you have to react before he is reacting. This is really important. And these are only 2 of the 7 steps you have to follow in order to be successful in crypto. And if you want to know all of these steps in much more detail, and if you want to have a comprehensive checklist, here's what you should do. There is a link below this video. Click on this link and you will get the opportunity to subscribe to my channel. Click on the link and you will see a video where I explain the next steps. So see you soon. Click on the link now. I'll see you there.